Wake up your morning in a brand new way with the positive people, places, events, and things in and around your neighborhood and around the world. No matter where you live, your mornings are about to get better. It's the refreshing way to start your day. No doom or gloom, just bright sunshine no matter what the weather. Metro Magazine with Bonnie McDaniel. Inspiring, informative, intelligent, Ion. Positively the best way to start your morning. I'm Bonnie McDaniel, and welcome to Metro Magazine. As a continuation of our Amazing Women series, we're talking to a woman who is more than amazing. She's actually the founder of Running Start, and she's doing great things as it has to do with young women who are looking to enter into the political arena. And so, rather than belabor the point, I'm going to introduce you to Jessica Grounds, who is the co-founder of Running Start.
Yes. Hi, Bonnie. Thank you for having me today.
Well, I'm so glad that you're here.
Yeah.
And we have to tell our viewers that we have a lot of things that are in common with both of us. And I was really fascinated when I realized you're a PK.
I am.
And
does everyone know? Yes.
For those of you who don't know what a PK is, we're preachers' kids. So
yes.
I guess people will say we're the good girls, but people who really know PKs know that that's not necessarily the truth all the time.
No, but it is a bond we have. And I think a lot of people, when you meet somebody who's a preacher's kid, they kind of, immediately we know the background we went through, but also just the wonderful foundation we were given by our awesome parents.
Well, let me ask you, if you had to choose one word to describe Jessica Grounds, what would that word be?
I mean, passion is such a overused word, but I think that's probably where it all comes from. I often talk about how in the work I do, you find women, and I think it's in yourself as well, where the work comes from sort of deep down. And it's...
But how does that happen? Because you don't just wake up. I know from my own personal experience that there are some defining moments in your life that makes you say, this is where I'm supposed to be. There must have been something that happened with you.
Well, one story I tell when I talk to my groups is I remember vividly being 8, and I was in the car with my grandmother, and she's an amazing woman. Her parents are from Spain, but she said something very 1950s at the time, or 1940s. She was like, "Jessica, boys are the breadwinners." And I said, "Grandma, girls can be the breadwinners too." And I'm 8. Like, where does that come from, Right. So it just kind of is I think there was a real deep sense of my own feminist or my own sort of desire to create equality and show the world that women had just as much ability as men from a really, really young age. My mom actually many years ago told me about generational legacies, which is this idea that part of your past is not only biologically given through your heredity, but there's also some kind of beliefs and thinking that's actually passed through generations. And there's challenges around that, because you can think of like alcoholism coming through the generational pipeline, but then there's also, I think, real deep beliefs. And my great-grandmother, who I never really met actually, she was kind of a feminist in her time. She was somebody who always wanted to be an independent individual and worked on a farm, but always, wanted to be educated. And so I think there's part of that in me where it kind of passes down through the generations, and you kind of pick that up. So I do think there is an ingrained piece, but there's also a piece where you do learn early that this is what gets me going. I think it's a combination of both.
Now, did you, talking about your educational background, were you homeschool, private school?
No, I went to actually a public school, and the parents were both that was really important. I actually went to a bilingual elementary school, so I speak a little Spanish. It was all Spanish and English. All my classmates were most of them were first generation from Mexico. And first of all, my grandmother's from Spain, so I grew up with Spanish in the home, and that was an important sort of, and being from California, it's Latin culture is an important part of sort of your life, but I had a really cool experience where a very multi-ethnic upbringing where my friends were from, I think we had 80 languages spoken at my elementary school in terms of backgrounds, even though Spanish was the language they taught. So that was always a meaningful part of my life, to have that sort of rich background and understanding of people from different backgrounds and perspectives.
It laid a foundation for a lot of the work that you're doing now, because you don't just do work here within the United States. You're going to some really interesting places, and she's going to tell you a story about a recent trip she took, but we're going to save that for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're right. I look back on it now and recognize how that was really foundational to me. And and again, you have to give a lot of credit to your parents, but having had this experience of saying, okay, we're going to pick this magnet school where they're, we want Jessica to learn a lot about from other people. And there's a couple of stories my mom tells me about. I came home crying one day because my friend Ruth, who lived in a really kind of a difficult, challenging neighborhood in San Diego, she was bused into our school. She came home one day and she said that, she came to school one day and she said that the night before someone was trying to break into her home, and it felt very unsafe. And I think my empathy, my kind of really being very empathetic, was something I learned earlier, part of who I was, that I was like, gosh, I want everyone to be able to feel safe when they go home and not have this. And so that was pretty, I think, formative early in my life.
Now talk to me about college.
Well, I went to college in California, Pepperdine. And in fact, a lot of people think it's actually a Christian university.
Right.
And my parents actually didn't want me to go to a Christian university. They wanted me to sort of see the world. I don't know.
I guess they wanted you to get
they weren't like
a
restrictive. They weren't saying no, but they also were kind of open, to what I chose, and I chose that school. And so I was the minority in that I was, a big Democrat, and this school was pretty conservative. People were apathetic like most, or they were big Republicans. So I, of course, decided to take on the presidency of the Young Democrats, and I had this group of like 5 people.
And you know what's hysterical? I'm really loving this story because I'm just learning that about you. And it is amazing how our past kind of defines where we're going. It sets the path, the tone for where we're going, because you also are married to a Republican now.
We're not married yet, but soon to be, yes.
Okay.
Yes, and he is a big Republican. I don't know what that...
That's hilarious.
I know, you come full circle. It's really interesting. So college, and then I'll talk about Wes. College was great because I think I've had to take my first women in politics class. I was a political science major, and it was actually a male teacher, which was interesting, but I completely realized that was really where my heart was empowering women, and there was a piece around women that I just knew.
So you've always known this?
Yeah, I think it started
on.
early, and then it got formed around college, and then so it was the class, and then I had to work on my first political campaign.
Okay.
And I worked for a woman named Fran Pavley, and she was a state, at the time, running for the assembly re-election, and it was I've had a lot of sort of Oprah aha moments, and that was one of them, which was, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a really public way to show women, show the world, show people that women can do just as much and just as well as men, because politics is so public. And they have to be in front of everyone, decision makers and effective and speakers. And so I literally was like, this is where I'm going to focus my life energy, is politics and women. And so that happened in college.
Wow.
So, and then yes, my years later, after dating many Democrats, I ended up with a Republican, and he's wonderful.
I would imagine you all have some very interesting conversations.
Yes.
Especially right now, considering what's going on in the country. I won't ask you anything personal, but
no, that's okay.
I can imagine that. But he must be a pretty awesome gentleman, the fact that you all can be on opposite ends, but also meet in the road on things like values and beliefs and things like that.
Right.
Talk to me about some of the values and beliefs that are important to you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Right. So this has been a progression. I never thought that would be possible, and I think a lot of people still don't get it, especially people who work in politics or are familiar with the challenges that exist when you have people from two different sides. I think I've really learned that when I'm with people who have a different perspective than mine, I just am so much more clear with what my beliefs are, but it also helps to open my perspective. To me, it's a lot, I went to business school, so it's a lot like a negotiation tactic. You learn a negotiation, if you just push for what you want and push for what you want, you're not open up, you aren't going to really be, at the end of the day, successful for yourself.
Are you all listening out there, political leaders?
I know, that's such a great story.
Please listen to this.
You just push, and it's like that, of course you're never going to get everything you want. And
exactly.
It's never going to be, maybe you do once, and then it's not sustainable.
Right.
But negotiation is you have to open it up to the other side, and you're going to give a little and you're going to get more. And so, and that is what he's really brought to me, which is, in terms of my political beliefs, I would say kind of rounding out and getting the other side, even though I'm still deeply committed to my own party's belief.
It's my observation, and because I'm not a political person, I could be wrong, but it seems that we're getting farther and farther away from that whole idea of meeting in the middle of the road. I see that a lot of the younger leaders, political leaders, seem to be, I want my way, I want my way. Is that something, am I accurate in that, or? Yes, there are more. I actually wouldn't say that they're the younger ones. I would say there are newer leaders. That's a better accurate. Yeah.
That, yes, because partly there's a multiple dynamics going on. One of the structural dynamics that's a problem in our country, which I don't necessarily know exactly how to rectify, but our primary system pulls out the more extreme candidate to win the primary. So the more liberal and then the more conservative for each party. And then, of course, one of them typically wins the right general, unless there happens to be a third-party candidate, which doesn't happen. And I'm not suggesting that should be, but so you have more extreme candidates winning. And then you don't have those sort of in-the-middle moderates, whether you're a conservative or a Republican or a Democrat. The moderates are more willing to acquiesce and have that kind of interplay. So because the primary structure has exacerbated the partisanship over the years. And because in the primaries, the more kind of, again, extreme candidate is sort of who wins. You have less people voting. Part of this is voting. So because people don't vote in the primaries, you're getting the more partisan groups out, or the more, really fundamental on either side to vote, and then you don't get the moderate candidate.
Now,
and that's actually really instrumental around the women's piece, which I could talk about too.
I want to focus on the women, because that's the area that you are the expert in, or the influencer in.
Right.
How are you, through the work that you're doing with Running Start, how are you trying to impact to make sure that women stay the course for making sure that we operate for everyone? Get a little bit here, a little bit there, but
well, if I could just give a little background, just so people understand the challenges. A lot of times I think people think there's a lot of women political leaders because we see Hillary Clinton and we see Nancy Pelosi and Michelle Bachmann, for example, and there aren't. We're currently, depending on the ranking, 77th in the world in women's political representation. So you mentioned I've been traveling a lot. In almost every case, the countries I go to have more women in elected office.
Interesting.
Than our own country, even though I'm going to tell them about what we're doing here to try to get more women to run. So we have a dearth of women candidates. Part of it is a numbers game. Women don't run at the same rate men do. So it's not just the fact that there are more challenges and barriers for women to actually be elected. That is? Women don't see politics as an avenue for change, most simply. They think, and it's very clear with the giving patterns that women have around philanthropy versus candidates. Women do not give to political candidates, so they don't see that as an effective use of their time and energy. So that's part of it. Women don't run because of the work-life balance challenges, especially younger women, which is what we also see in other industries like law firms. Women are more educated in terms of numbers, but they don't rise to the top. So there has to be other barriers around that. So it's work-life balance, them stepping back from wanting to be in really public roles. You have media scrutiny. One of the most fundamental things that we focus on with Running Start, and I'll talk about our work, is more of the internal challenges. I know it's stuff that you talk about a lot in your book, which is women actually don't feel as qualified as men. And so the study that was done by Jennifer Lawless and Richard Fox that's most sort of formative around this was she took men and women from business backgrounds, political activists, and lawyers, so typical people who run for political office. She surveyed them. Men and women had the same backgrounds from these industries. The women were a third less likely to feel qualified to run. Wow. And if I could just share a story she tells, which is so, I think, illustrative of this dynamic. So she says, okay, well, this is really problematic. I'm going to call a couple of these people and find out what the deal is. So she calls this one woman, Mary, and Mary has indicated she's never been recruited to run for office, but she was really involved politically. So she calls Mary to kind of get her story. And Mary's like, oh, yeah, well, I was involved locally. I was working with the mayor on this school bond issue. I was trying to raise money for my schools. And Jennifer, the researcher, said, wow, so you've never been recruited to run, or you've never thought about running? And she's like, well, now that you say this, actually the mayor did say, gosh, you'd be really good for the school board. Why don't you think about running? She just hadn't even connected that she'd been recruited to run for office. It was a clear recruitment. And then she says, okay, contrast that to this gentleman, Joe, I call. So Joe has indicated he's absolutely been recruited to run for political office. And Joe's like, and so Jennifer called Joe, said, hey, tell us your story. How did you get recruited? He's like, oh yeah, absolutely. It happened just the other day. I was at the airport at Chicago O'Hare Airport, sitting at the bar, giving commentary on CNN out loud. Oh, this and that. And the guy next to me said, gosh, you're really smart. You should run for office. So I think it's such a great example of like, she was literally recruited to run for office by an elected official. He was told by a guy at a bar, oh, you should run for office. And that's the difference that women kind of see in themselves and their abilities.
But stay tuned. There's more to come.
Queen Bee is a book about some of the habits, some of the things that we women do really to undermine ourselves and undermine other women. And it's something that we really can't afford to do any longer. It's actually a book that is a combination of research that I've done, interviewing other women and men about what is it that has kept us over the years from becoming the empowered women that we say we are. I have taken interviews from women who talk about some of the experiences they've had in working with other women, either in the capacity of just having relationships in different types of settings, whether it be in the corporate boardroom or a lot of the women that I talk to are entrepreneurs, but really just delving into not just the things that we do in terms of day-to-day, to perform our jobs, but really looking at the things that are really holding us back. One of the things that's interesting to me is the fact that if you take a woman, an average woman, and if you're honest, and put her in a room with 15, 20 other women and have a gorgeous woman walk in the room, watch the reaction. Chances are very good she's not going to like her, and it has nothing to do with anything other than the fact that she, in their own minds, looks a certain way. If you take that and reverse it, and you are the woman who thinks that everything about yourself is intact, you're going to respond to that woman in a different way. And you're going to listen to her rather than look at her physical being. And that's what I want women to do. I want us to stop looking at what we have on, whether or not, we're thinner or heavier than the next woman, but really to look at who we are as women. I'm hoping, if nothing more, that by reading Queen Bee, women will start to really look at themselves for the amazing people that they are. To look at the gifts that each of us brings to the table. And we all have something unique, something special. I also hope women will finally own the fact that you came here to do something special that no one else can do. And not to compare yourself to someone else. Measuring and comparing are totally two different things, but really to begin to embrace the unique qualities and the strengths that you have. Because when we bring all of those qualities together collectively, there isn't anything that women cannot do.
Up to 40% of businesses never recover after experiencing a major disaster. Make a plan at ready.gov/business.
We've talked about the work that you're doing here in the United States, but you have
Yeah.
a fascinating story. You must hear this because this woman travels everywhere, and I've never even heard of this remote area that you've you just came back from a trip. So why don't you talk to us about that and some of the things that happened when you were away?
Okay. First of all, my colleague Susanna and I, who run Running Start, we love doing our work. Our work is all domestic here in the U.S. As I mentioned before, we have a big challenge here. But I was invited about a year or two ago by the State Department to start doing trips overseas. And so the U.S. embassies in different countries will request speakers on different topics. And they thankfully are moving towards this need about women's political empowerment and really women's empowerment in general and advocacy in these countries. So I have been to Panama, Northern Ireland, and then most recently to Tajikistan,
which I've never heard of before.
If you don't know where it is, I'm happy. It's north of Afghanistan and west of China. It's in Central Asia, and it's a former Soviet country during the USSR. So once it broke up, the USSR, it became its own independent state. So I was there just last week in Dushanbe, which is the capital, and I had an incredible experience. It's a 90% Muslim country. So there's a lot of challenges around the gender roles for women within that cultural context. And there's a lot of conversation. Is this religious? Is this cultural? I think it's a combination of the two. And so what I did was I went around the country and I talked about women's advocacy and what I do in the U.S. to get more young women engaged, but also why is it important for women to be part of public life and be advocates. And I literally had a gentleman at one instance after I had the statistics of women in politics and business in the U.S. and in Tajikistan say, what about the housewives? I'm like, okay, Mr. Housewife, let's talk to you. And everyone laughed. So I had,
So was he talking about the series Housewives of whatever, or was he talking about
He's
housewives?
Like, what about the percentage of housewives?
Okay.
So there's a real challenge around the cultural place for women, the societal acceptance around women. So I had to really work through a lot of these conversations, and I wanted to be sensitive to their experience, but also say in our country, this is one thing that I love about the U.S. and being an ambassador for the U.S. really is saying we believe in equality and we believe that men and women are created equal and they need to both be a part of public life for us to make the best outcomes.
I'm curious, what was his response to that?
I mean, he just was quiet, and he was talking to his buddies at one point, and I said, you know what? If you don't want to join my conversation, you could leave, because he was talking. But anyway, it was just, there was a real challenge even with the senior people, and I would even say the local senior people who are involved with the U.S. work there, that they just like, well, who is taking care of the children? And I said, at
the end of the day,
it's a great question.
Yeah.
It's not to be dismissed.
Right.
But I think the conversation needs to be, why is it only the women are taking care of kids?
There needs to be a balance.
There has to. And I think there has to be a shift, and it's not going to happen overnight, but people have to see a much bigger picture around this. Is we have to raise our children, kids, and I could think I'm an example of this. You're an example of this. When you have dads and moms working together, you have two parents, or you have and I get that there's different dynamics of families, and I have a lot of incredible friends who have single parent families, but I think that's the best scenario to have kind of at least two parents, whatever they, to have kind of share, because it is a lot to be able to do.
And when I've talked to people and they talk about, when I share with them some of my experiences, both professionally and otherwise, because when I was in corporate America, for instance, I traveled abroad a lot. And people, I say to people that, I was able to do this because I had a husband who understood that this was a shared role. Yes. That they had a mother and a father. Yes. And it meant that we needed to work together to raise this family. Right. And it allowed me the opportunity to be able to have the experiences I had. So when I was traveling, my husband, he was Mr. Mom. Yeah. And he would travel, and we understood that. And I think that in a large part when women, if they can find partners or seek out partners, and I think Sheryl Sandberg talks about this, and she got a lot of flack for it, but the truth of the matter is, you really have to be mindful of that, because if you're going to have a family, you need partners who are going to participate equally in the process.
100%. And that is something we talked about. And so I try to, it is really challenging, but I try to make people try to think a little bit bigger and recognize that society will benefit as a whole. Men will benefit, women, families, communities, when you have decision makers of both genders. And it's actually really clear in the research that it's actually the diversity of gender is actually the most significant kind of diversity, like we're kind of pulling out. And so I think that that's really powerful.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel in talking to you this morning that I know there's another layer of Jessica Grounds that...
Oh, you think?
I do. And I think really the world, not just here, is really blessed to have you, because I think you bring a lot of that stuff that I talk about inside. You bring that to the table when you're conducting the people's business, and that's what you do.
Thank you.
I will say that I was invited to come and participate in, I guess it was your first summit at Georgetown this summer.
Yeah.
And what an experience that was for me to have all of these, you know, young women around who are just like eager to learn about how to be, you know, become better leaders. And I was honored to work with a group of the young women. Teaching a class and doing a workshop, actually. And I can tell you, you are definitely on the right path.
Oh, thank you, Bonnie. Well, thank you for including me in this amazing conversation.
Well, I think you're an amazing woman.
Oh, you're so sweet. Well, I think you are too, and you're such a great role model for so many women.
Thank
you. So thank you for being there and being out there. That's part of this too, is that we, whatever our position is, and that can look so different, that we're out there in a very visible way, and we're also... I think that's an important part of leadership, is being able to be reached, and that young people or whoever hears can feel like you are somebody that is approachable and is able to kind of be there and supportive. And that's a big part of this conversation, is how we get women to support each other and keep building each other up. So, well,
thank you. I am so glad to be able to have this reciprocity going between the two of us. And you have an opportunity now to look at that camera and talk about Running Start, or say anything else that you need to say to get people to get behind you and support you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being a part of this and watching. So Running Start, as I mentioned, was founded 7 years ago. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization inspiring girls and young women from all over the country to lead in politics. We start with high school girls. We work all the way up to young professional women, giving them mentors, giving them skills building training. And we need you to be a part of our network. We have a couple ways. If you're in DC, it's great, because you could be a member of Running Start and come to many of our events. But if you're not here, supporting us through, we do a $10 and $20 a month membership. You get access to a lot of our great events, but also really support this effort that we need more young women engaged in the political process. And it's going to start early. We're really changing culture, which is a big endeavor. It's a big challenge. And I encourage you to check out our website, runningstartonline.org. and learn more about our different programs. We have a college fellowship program on Capitol Hill, where women get to work for a woman member of Congress. If you know a college woman, it's a great opportunity. And we're going to be on 50 college campuses this year, training women to run for student government, which is a huge connection to actually getting more women to run as adult women, that in college they get that confidence and experience being a candidate. So there's a lot of great programs and opportunities, and I encourage you to check out Running Start. Google Running Start, you'll find us, bringing young women to politics, and feel free to reach out to me, Jessica Grounds. Thank you.
That was awesome.
Thanks. Sure.
Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see where this takes us next.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been Bonnie McDaniel and Jessica Grounds for Metro Magazine, and we will see you next time with another amazing woman. Have a good week. I'm Bonnie McDaniel, and welcome to Metro Magazine. As we continue our series on amazing women, we're talking to Hazami Barmada, who is the founder of the Arab Empowerment Initiative. Hazami, welcome to Metro Magazine. I want to, first of all, commend you on the work that you're doing. I know you have a lot of things that are in play right now, empowering women, not just here in the United States, but around the world. But before we get into the work that you're doing, as you know, we talked a while back about some of the things that really caused you to be on this path. And I want to talk to and have you share with our viewers the things that motivate you. So if I could ask you, what is it that you think makes you an amazing woman?
Well, thank you very much for having me and allowing me to share my story. I think that's an issue that I'm always struggling and confronting, trying to figure out what it is that inspires me. And I think that's what inspires me. It's the process of constantly creating and recreating and stopping and reflecting on what is my role and how can I be of impact to the world around me. It's this idea of social consciousness that inspires me ultimately to realize what that potential may be and constantly iterate and reiterate myself to try to figure out how to best allow me to be me in order to do what I love doing.
Okay. Now, before we get into the work that you're doing, I want to talk about Hazami, the person, because I know that there's a lot of, and I like to characterize it as texture that allows you to be the woman that you are. First of all, when I first met you, I called you an old soul. I didn't imagine that you were as young, not because you look older, but because of the texture or the depth that is there. And to have a consciousness such as you have, normally you find that in someone who's been around for a little while. So I want you, if you would, to talk about, share with our viewers your background, your family, because you're an Arab woman, and I know that you lived in a place where I'm like, okay, you're from Mississippi, I think, which is kind of interesting, and you're also Syrian. So talk a little bit more about that.
I actually consider myself a global citizen. So the most awkward question is when someone asks me, where are you from?
Right.
Because I respond, what do you mean? Where do I live? Where are my parents from? Where did I grow up? Where was I born? I truly am a global citizen. So I was born in the UK to a Palestinian mother and a Syrian father. Lived between Europe, the Middle East, and all over the United States for about an equal 1/3 portion of my life. And what that really allowed me to do is to see such diversity, both in people and cultures and realities, and never really feeling like you belong to one of those cultures.
Right.
Really kind of provoked a lot of deep reflection from a much earlier age. When I traveled to the Middle East, I don't look Arab to a lot of people. Not that, there is an Arab look because you have 350 million people of Arab living in the Arab world. But I always looked European. And when I come to the United States, I look like a foreigner. And so it's always that thing where people try to box you and they can't. And so it's allows me a room of creativity to really kind of explain and have that opportunity to explain who it is that I am and where I'm from. So my parents are originally from the Middle East and traveled to the UK seeking education, higher education, and traveled back and took us back to the region. So I spent a critical part of my life living in Syria. I also lived in Saudi Arabia growing up, and then moved to the United States permanently, wrapping up my last year of high school, and I did that in Mississippi. And so when people ask me, always, it's a culture shock to go to the Arab world. I always tell them it was a bigger culture shock for me to go to Mississippi.
Now, what's interesting is I have traveled to so many different places, and Mississippi is one of those states, being African American, where I have, for whatever the reason, I've had this block. I've never gone to Mississippi before. I've been all over the United States, pretty much. Mississippi and Las Vegas are two places I've never gone. Las Vegas, because I imagine people who go there gamble, which I know that there are people who live there and do other things. Mississippi, because of our history. So when you told me you were from Mississippi, immediately I had this image pop up in my head. And so for me and also for our viewers, talk about what it was like living in Mississippi as an Arab woman.
No one ever knew I was Arab. And it was amazing. It was a very amazing experience because I got to see racism in a much broader context, because in Mississippi it's very much black on white, and all the issues of race are reduced to Hispanic, black, white, and then the rest of the world is this monolithic blob of otherness. Now
see, because if I did not know, and if I saw you in Mississippi or in the South, I would think you were either Hispanic or you were a very light-skinned black person, because there are people in my family who look like you.
I get that all the time.
Yeah, so from that standpoint, I would imagine that you might have been mistaken for an African American or maybe Hispanic. So talk about some of the experiences you had because of that.
One of the most powerful memories I have is being in Mississippi. It's experiencing a story where I was actually sitting at a cafe with a bunch of my friends, and they were talking about 9/11. It was people that I knew from my college and then people beyond. And they got into this very heated discussion about how these Arabs and Muslims are so backwards and hideous and heinous and destructive. And no one knew that I was an Arab Muslim woman.
Right.
And so I just allowed them to talk, and I actually began to fuel the conversation where I was like, yeah, them people are so backwards, and we should fear them. And I really just wanted to, it was like a social experiment. I was studying sociology at the time, which is what my undergraduate degree is in. And I just wanted to provoke people to see, how far will people go with ignorance and prejudice. And then it was not towards the very end of the conversation where I stopped them and I said, guys, you should be really afraid. And everyone kind of looked at me really perplexed, and they said, why? And I said, because I'm one of those people that you just described.
Wow.
I'm an Arab Muslim woman who was a migrant to this country. And they were like, but you speak English extremely well. And I said, I speak Arabic equally as well. It doesn't matter. My heritage and my religion has nothing to do with how I speak English. And so I think for them, and everybody was very apologetic. And I said, you have nothing to apologize for. But know that you never know who it is that you're interacting with. And even just that, on that level, you should be mindful of what you're saying, because you can say offensive things. So you can have your own, racist thoughts. And I realize it's oftentimes because people lack exposure. But I assure you, everyone in that environment, was shocked, because I was not the image of what it is that they thought somebody who was Arab and Muslim and it would look like. And again, a big part of it is because they did think that I was a light-skinned or mixed.
A boy born in Joplin, Missouri was fascinated by anything with wheels and a motor. The odds of him winning both the Daytona 500 and the Brickyard 400 in the same year, 1 in 195 million. The odds of the child being diagnosed with autism, 1 in 110. I'm Jamie McMurray, and my niece has autism.
Learn more at autismspeaks.org/signs.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie Couric. Like most people who have a loved one suffering with a serious illness, when my father had Parkinson's, I would have given the shirt off my back to help him. Shirt? Put the shirt on your back for Moving Day, a new day for Parkinson's and for our city. The National Parkinson Foundation's fundraising walk. Help us change the world for the whole Parkinson's community. Make your move today at parkinson.org.
Now, I grew up in the South. I grew up in Florida. A lot of people say it's not the South, but trust me, it's the South. And I know, and when I went away to college, I moved to New Jersey, and that's where my children were born. But we go home a lot, and especially with my son, there's that conversation that an African-American parent has with their children about, you shouldn't go to this part of the, of the town. And if you do, this is the kind of behavior that you should exhibit. Those kinds of conversations, because we're afraid that, racism is going to impact them in some way. Was that a conversation your dad or your mom ever had with you?
No, never. I think growing up so internationally, I literally feel, and it's a very shocking feeling to me, but I really transcend all boundaries. People people can't pigeonhole me.
But that's your mindset. And what I'm asking you is, because your dad, I'm sure, knew about the history, and because it's very easy to mistake you for someone other than Arab, which is can be
which is actually complex. Better than being mistaken as Arab in a lot of places in the South.
Well, is that a conversation that your dad ever concerned that your parents ever had for you? No,
race and religion were never. Actually, on the contrary, my father wanted us to embrace them more. Wanted me specifically as the only daughter to embrace it more. And it was never a conversation. It was never an issue. I mean, it never impacted me or any conversations inside the household.
Okay. Now, talk to me a little bit more, because I'm going back to the conversation you said you had this social experiment you said you had with some of your contemporaries, and you said, you shared some of the reaction when they finally learned that you were Arab. Was that a moment where you began to become conscious yourself about the work that you're now doing? Talk about that process and also what impact that might have had on you and where you are right now.
Absolutely. Okay. I think it's several moments like that I recall feeling like I had a responsibility. Not a responsibility, and I always make this very clear in even the public talks that I give. I don't ever say or claim to speak on behalf of Muslim women or Arab women. What I do is put a face to a Arab woman or a Muslim woman and provide people with an actual humanized narrative of the life, an ordinary life of someone who, you know, grew up in a cultural heritage and with a religion that a lot of people associate with negativity and news and the things they hear, oftentimes very toxic and very, you know, skewed and biased by the media. So for a lot of people, I think the curiosity of interacting with me and in a way, it was very comforting for them because I speak with no accent. Now, I'm very conscious of the fact that if I had an accent or wore hijab, a headscarf, or maybe was a little more darker complected, I would probably not be as quote unquote lucky socially to be able to blend and merge into different community groups. So I think because of that, I started to feel a sense of responsibility. To be more of an advocate in the space of cross-cultural understanding. And that's kind of how I started with all of my work. It was on my college campus in Mississippi, in Memphis, sorry, which is where I transferred to school at Rhodes, where I assumed the president's position of the Muslim Students Association. And up until then, I never outwardly you know, claimed to be of a Muslim faith. It didn't really, at the time, it didn't really dictate any of my life or interactions. It was something that was internal, and faith to me has always been very internal. It's my relationship with my own God. It's how I want to live my life. It's the values that I want to embrace, and I want those to come across, and I truly feel this is the core of Islam, to come across through your actions and not through your words. And I think it's the core of any faith. So for me, being a Muslim was not about talking about it. It was about just being a good person and then having people feel comfortable with me and my work and associate themselves with it. And it was through that I started to kind of educate people about Islam, volunteering, you know, doing things that a lot of people wouldn't do, waking up at 5 a.m. to go feed the homeless, when a lot of other people who talked about faith, you know, spent all their time doing other things. To me, faith was how I lived my life. So it was that moment in college where I took this responsibility of the MSA, the Muslim Students Association. But even then, people would look at me and they say, but you're not a real Muslim, even internally within the Muslim community.
I was about to ask you, how do the people in your community, how do they see you? Because you say you're a global citizen, and I know that I have other Arab friends whose ideas, as it has to do with Islam, are somewhat different than what you have described in terms of being, and I guess that's the case with any culture, where there are some people who are very conservative in their views and others who are more liberal, if you want to use that word. So how do the people in your community generally view Hazami?
I think I've been embraced by a lot of people in my community. I mean, it
the young people or the older?
Both.
Okay.
And when I first moved even to Washington, I mean, it was one of those things. I started doing a lot of interfaith work, and I used to get a lot of comments of, "Oh wow, it's amazing that a Christian woman gives so much back to the Muslim community." A lot of people thought I was either a convert or a revert, and I get that a lot. Okay. I think the fact that I was gaining traction, I started doing my own volunteer initiatives that went from having 2 or 3 people to having hundreds of people, getting press coverage when we never even submitted a press release. It was the diversity of our group. It was the just the genuine, I think, engagement of so many people. And I started doing all of this on social media, where I would just say, you know, hey, community, would you like to do X, Y, and Z? And just people out of the woodworks would come out and say, you know what, wow, I've never associated with a mosque. I've never associated with a religious ideology. I'm Muslim and I relate to you. You are a person who's aiming to do good deeds in the name of your faith, but you're not putting your faith out there. Like it's not in my face. So a lot of people started coming out of the woodworks. And it was through that I got very closely intertwined with a lot of the bigger institutionalized Muslim institutions that I think a lot of people shy away from, like a lot of other faith-based institutions, where if you feel like you're an outlier, you're not as engaged, especially within the Muslim community, where you have, you know, ideologies that may also be culturally fueled and not religiously fueled. And there's a lot of diversity. So you have, you know, Southeast Asian Muslims tend to have a different view. You know, in the Middle East, in the Levant where I'm from, religion is very social also. It's about social expectations. It's about humility in your family name and things like that. So it wasn't necessarily tied into religion as much as it was kind of cultural context of kind of societal norms and expectations that were derived from faith, but it was never, you know, I just knew better. It was kind of like, you don't ever spend the night outside of your house because you know better. Right, but it wasn't because the Quran said X, Y, and Z. Whereas I know some communities that live by the word of the Quran. That was never the upbringing that I had, or a lot of my friends had. So, you know, I think with time, the community started to realize that I was working in a different space, and it was pulling a lot of people that were not engaged into the forefront of engagement. And we were getting great press for it. And it wasn't the reason why I was driven, but it was also a very positive unintended consequence. And it was through that, you know, people started messaging me saying, oh, I'm Muslim and I want to do this in my community in Michigan. Can you help me put together a toolkit for how to engage? And so, you know, the people that would be considered conservative started actually reaching out to me and embracing me, which was very unexpected even for me.
Now, we talked about the social experiment that you did to kind of, I guess, open your eyes in a large sense to how people really thought. I guess you maybe had an inkling, but that was a moment where you was like, wow, it's kind of in your face and you can't deny it any longer. I know in sharing with you you know, in a different setting, there was another defining moment, if you will, of something that happened during Hurricane Katrina. Because people don't just show up. There are moments that occur in your life that test your faith, that test your resilience, that test your strength. And you shared with me something that really helped me to get to know Hazami and the strength that you have as a young woman. And I keep saying this because, do you mind saying you're like in your early 30s, right?
In my late 20s.
Late 20s. And it's unusual for someone at your age to have the texture that you have. And I want you to talk to me about what happened during Hurricane Katrina. And I don't mean to make you cry.
You already did.
It's okay.
The word Katrina sends chills up my spine.
Share what happened with your family and what was your response when you realized your family was in danger?
As we shared that before. I mean, it's one of those moments that I don't share often, and you know, I think it adds a lot of depth to the work that I do and to who I am and to what fuels me. Having these experiences, to a lot of people that hear them are shocked. You know, I wouldn't know that you went through all of these things. Right. And I think that to me is the beautiful takeaway, is that so many people have stories. Everybody has a narrative. Everybody has a story.
And that's why we're here.
Yeah, when you interact with someone, you don't know what it is that's behind them. And, and the whole idea of treating everybody with respect, you know, because you really don't know what it is that makes somebody who they are, and the many levels of hurt and pain and positivity and just all of the different emotions that go into making us who we are. I myself have, Hurricane Katrina was a very big moment in my life. And it was a moment that I, again, so much of who I am was fueled by the leadership skills that developed in these moments of pain. You know, all of the ones that I described, you know, especially, you know, Memphis with the story, and then Katrina, I realized that I had social influence.
Well,
and that was scary.
I want to get to the story, and you're skirting
the
around it.
Story.
I feel you putting,
because you're going to cry.
We're putting pretty words around it, but I want you to share, because I think it's important for people to understand that, especially for the women who are watching this, which is why I'm doing this, for people to understand that it's not the titles, it's not the influence that we may or may not have, but it's the things that happen in our lives and the responses
that give us that.
That gives us that texture. And I want women to understand, so that when you are in a tough situation or you're in a fearful situation, that it's your response that really makes you. And so it's important that you share this and don't talk around it. I'm not going to let you leave until you do. Let's talk about what happened.
So Katrina hit, and I was just your average student at Rhodes College, you know, enjoying the outdoors and everything in between. And I realized my family was still down in Mississippi and they refused to evacuate. My father wanted to stay in the hospital. My mother and oldest brother were at home, and we live really close to the water. I was glued to the news and watching it all unfold, and it just was not looking good. So I was stuck on the phone and telling them leave. At that point, it was too late to go. The highways were blocked. People were on the road. It was practically impossible. So my father said, you know, I'm in the hospital and it's safe. I said, that's fine, but where's my mom and my brother? And they were at home. And he said, they'll be fine. And I said, they're not going to be fine. Did you board up the house? And, you know, I felt like for the first time I had responsibility towards my parents. And it was my parents that had always provided for me. And it was for the first time I was very angry because I felt my parents were very irresponsible for not taking the storm seriously. And my dad kept downplaying it. And as it grew, the hype in the media, it was like, I have to do something. I have to drive in to go see where my family is. And it was just this thought that came into my head. And I had just moved into my apartment, and I had a new roommate by the name of Ashley Hunt. We had 4 people living in the apartment, but she was one of them. And I had just met her a few days prior because it was the very beginning of the semester in April, or not April, sorry, in August. And I was just anxious. I started to develop anxiety. I said, I just don't have a good feeling about this. So I kept on the phone with my dad. I said, I'm watching the news, bring mom to the hospital. So my mother and brother went to the shelter and left, went back home. My mom said the shelter is just a horrible condition. I'd rather die at home with my house than be in the situation, and all types of stories. And she just said she didn't feel safe. And here I am on the phone, you know, listening to your mother. And I think it's important to contextualize also. My mother is a Palestinian refugee whose family had to leave their home and migrate to Jordan during the time of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So she's someone who's already lost everything, and her family got uprooted and moved. And, you know, our family has since, which is the story of a lot of the Palestinian diaspora, scattered around the world and found new homes. So this was her home, you know, and she'd built it. It was the first house we've ever owned because we moved so much growing up. So I think she was just, all I could sense in her voice was, you know, whatever happens, happens. It is what it is. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die. And it was that just, hearing that was just devastating to me, because it was like, why are you not taking this seriously? So at the end, my father ended up bringing my mother to the hospital, and they had a lot of issues with the hospital because they were understaffed, and a lot of the hospitals were trying to Airbus people out, and the storm was picking up, and nothing was planned well. The storm hit, and I was, right before I was trying to get to Mississippi, and I called the dean of the university, and I said, I'm leaving. I told my professors I'm leaving, and they're like, where the heck do you think you're going? I said, I'm driving into the storm. And they said, to do what? To find my family. And they're like, okay, just wait till the storm hits. What are you going to do? You're going to find your family. You're going to die with them. What's the point? And the more people said that to me, the more I got frustrated, because I'm like, you know, if it was your family, would you be saying that? Right. You know, so, you know, think about it from the other perspective. And so I called the dean and I said, I'm going to go to Mississippi for a while and see what's happening with my parents. And he said, well, it's the beginning of the semester and you're going to miss the first couple of days of school, so you have to drop out. And I was just like, you really think I care? my family. I mean, yeah, I'm going to get a degree, but I'm not going to have a family. And it's, you know, it was interesting because how people rationed it out. And so at the end, my friend Ashley, I was going to take my little hunky Toyota Corolla with the hubcaps falling off. I was going to take that down into the storm. And Ashley was like, no, what are you doing? And so she had gotten permission from her father, again, a family that I didn't know at all. And they gave us a truck and filled it with supplies and equipment and everything you could fathom. And the dean of the university told me in the chaplain's office also, wait till the morning.
Can I ask you a question? I'll stop you right there. You said Ashley, her family. Is this a Christian family?
Yeah, they are Southern Baptist Christian. And
a very interesting dynamic there. And the point I want to make is how people, when you get beyond our differences and you focus on the things that are important to us as human beings, that is the key to whatever crisis you might be in. And I wanted to make that point. Go ahead.
Well, it shocked me. It shocked me that her parents were supportive. You know, knowing that they were sending their daughter into a danger zone. But not only that, like, you know, they just gave so much. They bought us everything from antibiotic wipes to boots and Wellingtons for us to sift through. You know, it was like we were expecting the worst, and we saw the worst. I mean, it was beyond the expectations of a lot of people.
So did Ashley go with you?
Ashley did. She went with me.
And you just met this young woman.
I just met her, and her dad was, was like, I would hope that if this happened, that someone would support my daughter the same way. So it was the whole thing was just very surreal.
So talk about what happened. You got the supplies, and
so I opened the next day. We opened the door of our dorm, and we saw overnight. I mean, I went to a small liberal arts school, but people had donated supplies, and they put them in front of the door, and so word had spread, and it was a very beautiful moment. It was kind of, people were discouraging, then all of a sudden everybody was
I think what's
embracing.
interesting is you look at that moment, and you look at what you do now, because you do a lot of the same thing right now, gathering supplies to send to Syria, but we'll get to that in a moment. So let's finish the story.
So we embarked on the way. I promised the dean that I would leave in the morning, and once the storm hit. So I was like, I'm going to stay up awake all night, and I don't remember falling asleep, but apparently at some point I fell asleep on the couch watching news. We got up early. We embarked on the way, and I remember listening to, this is my first time really listening to country music, but the Dixie Chicks and all of these just like really sad. You have an
Arab woman from the South listening to this.
And I
Dixie
love
Chicks.
it. I love it. And we were just singing the songs at the top of our lungs, and just, it was positive, engaging. And what I loved about the country music is it was life stories of people losing things and finding themselves. And it was such it was perfect timing. It was like all the songs you listen to just fit the moment. And so yes, country music and I are now best friends. And it surprises so many people that get in my car. They're like, what are you doing? You're like a hillbilly Arab woman. So we started driving down to Mississippi, and we knew that we were going to get turned away, because everybody started saying there was military checkpoints and it's crisis mode and all this stuff, and none of that mattered to me. And where there's a will, there's a way. I always grew up with a very determined family, and I was going to get through. And how didn't matter, and I just knew I was going to get through. So we ended up driving through and listened to country music the entire way, and it took us a lot longer than expected, obviously, with traffic and cars stopped. And a few days later, we figured, I mean, the streets were all uprooted. All the landmarks that I knew were not there. I had no clue where I was. Literally, I was totally disoriented. And, we managed to go to where my parents' office was and parked the car there because we were exhausted and needed sleep. And we'd heard all these stories about people killing each other. And here we are having a car full of supplies. It was a truck, and so it was because it was a farm truck, the sides had these hydraulic things, and they opened, you could put hay inside, so that's where most of the supplies were, so they were hidden. And then we had tarps, and we had hid everything so that we wouldn't be attacked. But I remember before we left, my friend's dad was like, do you guys want a shotgun?
I was about to say, because in the South, that's what we do. We ride with a gun in the back.
I was like, give me a shotgun. And Ashley's face of terror. She was like, shotgun? Are we going to shoot somebody? I'm prepared to shoot somebody. So we ended up sleeping outside, and it was humid. I mean, it was humid. There were mosquitoes everywhere. We're right on the water in August after a hurricane. And it was just, it smelled. It was disgusting. And all I wanted to do was find my parents. And at this point, all the communication was down, so I couldn't get in touch with anybody. And we drove by where the house was, and you can't get to where the house was, but my heart started sinking the closer we got to where it was, because you could see everything else was destroyed. And at that moment, I knew we had no home.